Well, firstly, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about my work I'm very passionate about. Fortunately, I have to start with some disclaimers. First disclaimer is I am not a medical doctor. So if you have lots of questions about certain things, I'm not qualified to answer you. I have to make that disclaimer up front. The second disclaimer that I have to make is that I am not receiving any financial or any other compensation from any pharmaceutical company to talk about these vaccines. Okay, just want to be clear on that. Let me just quickly start by introducing myself. My name is Helen. Yes, I sit on the board. I'm a pharmacist. I have a PhD in pharmacology. I didn't know whether I'd have video, so I put a picture of myself up front, and that's my daughter. And that's I was trying to do homeschooling very successfully. As you can see, we're not taking it too seriously. The reason I'm here is that I work for a contract research organization. Contract research, and the company's called ICON, as you can see from that slide there. A contract research organization is a company that is outsourced by pharma. So pharma actually, contrary to popular belief, don't do a lot of the work themselves. They outsource the operational stuff to organizations like my organization. And it's in that context that I'm really talking to you because Pfizer, who are partnering with a company called BioNTech, have been developed and have brought to market the COVID or the second COVID-19 vaccine. And my company and I were involved pretty closely over the past 9 months to get that vaccine to market. So because of my experiences with that, I've been asked to chat to you, to talk to you about potential hesitancies in getting this vaccine. Questions that you probably have: is the vaccine safe and is it effective? I'm going to answer that up front. Yes, it's safe. Yes, it's effective. But I want to explain to you over the next 15 to 20 minutes why and what the process is to get a drug to market. So I have a quick agenda here. I've already done the disclaimer and the intro. I'm going to give you a little story first, then I'm going to talk about general drug development and specifically about development of the COVID vaccine. I'm going to talk about its effectiveness, I'm going to talk about its safety, and I'm going to...
You went mute, Helen. I'm not sure why.
Actually, the host was trying to mute me. You can hear me now, right?
Yes, we can hear you. Sorry.
Okay. And interrupt me anytime if you have any questions, if what I'm saying doesn't make sense. I want to start with a little story. And this story takes you back about 60 or 70 years. There was this drug on the market, and it was fantastic in alleviating headaches. Men took it, women took it, they had a migraine, they had a little headache. The drug was perfect. It treated them fantastically. 9 months later, people started noticing in a sort of confined space, and the confined space was the space of Australia, there seemed to be a higher incidence of untoward births, namely children were being born without limbs. Because it was a confined space on the island of Australia, clever doctors put 2 and 2 together. They looked at what do all these mothers of these kids have in common that these kids are being born without arms or legs? And the answer was they had all been taking a drug for headaches during their pregnancy. This drug was called thalidomide. Fast forward 30 to 40 years, thalidomide these days is still available, but it's given to treat hematological malignancies. So it's given to myeloma patients, people who have blood cancers, and it works. People who are dying of blood cancer are getting thalidomide and they're becoming healthy. The moral of the story, and that's kind of the thread of my talk throughout this little presentation, there are risks. There are risks when you take anything, when you take any drug. There are benefits. You have to outweigh or weigh up the risks against the benefits. And I think everybody has to do that for themselves. So in the instance here of thalidomide, if you're pregnant, clearly have a headache, the risk of taking thalidomide is huge. You wouldn't do it. But if you're dying of a myeloma, yes, you would take thalidomide. The risk and benefit ratio is different. So bear that in mind as I go through and I talk to you about the safety and the benefits of the vaccines. My next slide is a quick outline of what is done in clinical research. So this is my bread and butter, if I can get you to the next slide. And it's basically the backdrop of clinical trials. You have, I'm going to start here with a little light bulb. So imagine mad scientists in a white lab coat with hair all over the place and their pipettes and their Bunsen burners and in their labs, and they discover a drug, they discover a compound. I can tell you, scientists don't have hair all over the place or white lab coats and work with Bunsen burners these days, but the concept is the same. They don't just randomly put it into humans. They actually, again, against contrary belief, don't randomly put the drugs into animals because animals respond totally different. We don't do that anymore. We model the drugs. We model the chemical structure of the drug based on what we know of the chemical composition of receptors in the humans. And if we think, okay, this will match, then we look at the drug in what they call phase 1 trials. Phase 1 trials are also called first in human, FIH. These trials take about 6 months to a year. We usually look at between 20 to 100 healthy volunteers. These are usually young men, definitely not women. And they volunteer and they come into a very confined unit. This unit has a ratio of 1 patient to 1 doctor and 1 nurse. So these people, these guys, are under 24/7 surveillance. They are monitored as soon as they get this test drug. Everything about them is monitored. Their heart rate, their temperature, their blood pressure, how they eat, how they feel, what their blood values are. It's constantly monitored. And what we're looking for in this environment is this compound safe? Does it affect the way our body works? We collect all this data, we analyze it. If we see that it's safe in healthy people, now bear in mind, we've not tested this yet in sick people, but if healthy people remain healthy, have no untoward reaction, it goes into the next phase. The next phase is phase 2. This takes a lot longer. It's about 1 to 2 years, phase 2. And we look at more patients, but these are patients. These are no longer healthy people. So if you have a drug that you want to market for rheumatoid arthritis, you would look for patients with rheumatoid arthritis. A doctor is involved. A doctor brings the patient in, brings the patient and the study together with the drug, and again, monitors these patients on an ongoing basis for the same things. Is the drug safe? We look at blood value, we look at blood pressure, we look at temperatures. But in addition to that, now we also look at how is the drug affecting the illness? If it's rheumatoid arthritis, do the joints feel better? Does the patient move more freely? Is the pain less? We capture all that, we analyze all that. 2 or 3 years later, we then say, okay, it's still safe. And actually, it looks like it's working in rheumatoid arthritis. We go to the last stage, phase 3. Phase 3 is very similar to phase 2, except we test it on a lot more patients because now we have a good feeling. We know that it's safe, we know that it's effective, so now we get a lot more patients involved. We look also at this case, probably more diverse patients, look at maybe different age ranges, we look at different ethnicities, we look at the drug in different countries, but it's the same concept. Patients come in, they're treated by their doctor, we monitor all their symptoms over a time period, and then at the end of these 3 to 5 years, we say, okay, the drug is still safe. We have side effects that are tolerable. It's effective. The benefits of taking the drug are good. We think this is a winner. We will now submit this drug to the regulatory body. So that's my little step here where it says new drug application. In the US, the regulatory body is the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug Administration take their sweet time about reviewing all the data that's been collected. Bear in mind at this point, you have data for thousands of patients, several years. It takes them a long time to review the data. Finally, if they think it's okay, they will give you the approval, the drug goes onto the market. It doesn't stop there. There are mechanisms in place once a drug is marketed to follow up safety and surveillance of the effects of the drug long term. I'll talk about those a little later. So that's general. I hope that was kind of clear. So basically what I'm saying is you're looking at a period of several years. You're looking at around 3,000 patients to get a drug approved, but the patients are constantly monitored. Now, in COVID, we didn't have that time. We just didn't have that luxury. So what happened in the development of the COVID coronavirus vaccine that we still managed to get this drug to market without cutting corners? It's actually quite amazing, I have to say, what was done there. So how did we speed up this entire development process without sacrificing safety? The process was pretty much the same. Now, the vaccine was in the discovery process because people had been expecting this kind of pandemic to happen. So it didn't take a long time for the vaccine to be discovered. Even the new mechanism, the mRNA vaccination methodology, was already in development. We put it into humans. We actually put it into humans in timeframe of April and May. There were around 20 people that were treated. They were fine. We moved straight on to putting it into the phase 2, 60 people. They remained fine and healthy. And then we did the same with phase 3 over a period of 3 months. Now, this is not 3 years, 3 months. We didn't treat 3,000 patients. We enrolled 44,000 patients. How can that be? One of the limitations when we develop drugs is actually finding patients. There's not a lot of patients that know about the concept of drug development. And if they do, they probably have the same reservations that you have. You know, I don't want to be a guinea pig for a drug. I don't want to be somebody that this is tested on. So us finding patients to test compounds on is a rate limiter. It takes a long time. We didn't have that limitation in the COVID vaccine. Everybody wanted it. The demand was so high that we had struggles keeping up. So that was one of the reasons why this went very quickly. The second rate limiter in clinical trials, I hate to say this, but I hope you understand it, is that everybody is really busy. So the FDA at any given moment in time, for example, will be looking at 3,000 drug applications with a limited number of bodies. Doctors have patients to treat, or they're doing other studies. So they wouldn't prioritize normally one particular study. But in this instance, everybody dropped everything and prioritized what we were doing on the COVID vaccine. Now, it's fascinating to me that we can reduce the development timeline from 9 years to 9 months. But I can tell you, well, I would usually have maybe 50 people working on something. In this particular instance, we had 500 people. Well, I usually would have people working from 9 to 5. They were working 24/7. They were not just working 5 days a week. We had everybody working the weekend. Everybody was working flat out. And it clearly not just my organization. It was the FDA, it was a pharma company. It was the investigators, the doctors who are treating the patients, the staff at the sites. It was the labs who are supplying the lab kits. It's the people who are analyzing the data. The entire world, I get quite emotional when I talk about it, but the world seemed to come together to get this drug to market. Now, it's not just one drug. I realize that we're having other drugs in parallel. Everybody was working on this. So that was why we managed to get the speed. Now, let me talk a little bit about, this kind of summarizes my comparison, normal drug development versus COVID. And again, I'm speaking specifically about the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. So instead of 3,000 patients, we had 44,000 patients. That's important to remember when you think about the safety profile. You usually take a drug, if you take something for, let's take ibuprofen, acetaminophen, Voltaren. When that came to market, it wouldn't have been tested in more than 3,000 patients. The COVID vaccine has been tested in 44,000 so far, and this is actually way out of date at this point, because you know that millions have been vaccinated worthwhile, and the clinical trials are still ongoing. They're still ongoing, and I'll explain that in a minute. But we're not stopping at the 44,000. So the number of patients that have been treated so far with this vaccine compared to what usually happens is exponentially higher. And I will come to the safety profile in a second, but the safety profile is significantly lower. Thought it might be interesting for you to hear how many doctors were involved. So we had about 200 doctors, mainly primary care physicians. There were actually several sites. Sites are doctor sites in New York that were involved. They were mainly the sites that were involved in the initial phase 1. I think it was Columbia Hospital that did the phase 1 work. Countries, those 44,000 patients did come from mainly the US, but some in Canada. We had 7,000 patients in Argentina, 3,000 in Brazil, 800 in South Africa, 500 in Turkey, 500 in Germany. And if you think that's weird, why do you have that country mix? The CEO of BioNTech is Turkish. He lives in Germany. And then Argentina, Brazil, and South Africa usually have a very high enrollment rate for these kind of trials. So it's generally we test trials in those countries. Another interesting comparison of normal trials versus the vaccine trials was normal trials limit their age range. We didn't do that in the COVID trials because we knew that we wanted to make the most vulnerable people, so the elderly people, get the vaccine ASAP, but also look at younger people. So this vaccine was tested on, I think, kids, teenagers, young adults from age 18 upwards. And I mentioned earlier that the study is still ongoing. So up until last week, we were testing the vaccine on adolescents, so 12 to 16-year-olds. That's all done. That's going to be available very soon. Again, safety profile was great. But there are other subgroups that need to be tested. Maternity, for example, pregnant women. So these are all things that are still ongoing as we continue to evaluate the vaccine. In my industry, there's a big buzz at the moment about ethnicity. Have we tested the drug not just in the right age range, in the right illness, but also have we got an appropriate variety of ethnicity in the trial? So I thought it was worth pointing out here that yes, we have a higher percentage, 80% of the patients enrolled were white, but that did include 26% of Hispanics. If I compare that to the US population, that's actually higher than the general US population. Patients of African American origin, 10% versus 12% in the US population, and then other is kind of Asian, and yeah. So it is, for a clinical trial, and even compared to the general population, a very close match. So all these patients all had the same side effect. There was no difference. I'm going to skip this trial. Actually, I'm just going to make one comment here. No, I'm not. I'm going to skip it. I'll come back to it. Effectiveness. I said earlier, the drug is effective. In the US, sorry, it was approved in the US. It's also approved in other countries. And again, I'm talking specifically about Pfizer. Pfizer was 95% effective. Moderna, I believe, was 94% effective. What does that mean? That means, firstly, remember I told you we injected 44,000 patients. We had to compare them to something. So the way the trial was designed is that half of the patients got the active treatment. The other half got the placebo. Placebo means there was no active ingredients. And what you do is compare how many patients get COVID on the active arm versus the non-active arm. You also compare the side effects. How are they different? So You might think that is unethical. I want to just stop there because you do have to have a comparison. What happens when you finish the study? And literally the study was finished in 4 weeks, 4 weeks treatment. Everybody that we knew did not get the active vaccine has been crossed over. So they call that a crossover design. So now everybody is getting or has received the active vaccine. The 22,000 patients that were randomized to the placebo arm have now received the active vaccine. But what we discovered was that of the 44,000 people, 170 got COVID within 21 days of the vaccine. But of those 170, the majority were in the placebo arm. There was only 8 patients where the vaccine didn't work. Now, if you think of that, 8 of 44,000 or 8 of 22,000, it's a hell of a low number. I'll talk a little bit about side effect profile in a minute, but there were severe cases of COVID, and 9 of those 10 severe cases were again in the placebo arm. So the patients who didn't receive the active drug. So what does that mean? Overall, that means that there is a tiny, tiny chance of you getting COVID. But if you do, it will be less severe. I think I mentioned this earlier, that, well, no, actually I didn't. There are new strains out. You've probably heard about South Africa. I think there's now comments about a strain in the UK and Brazil, etc. There's a lot of hype on the news about this. Are the vaccines effective against these new strains? I need to be very clear that we have not tested them yet. Those trials, I said earlier, there are trials that are ongoing. We're now looking at trials in those new, more aggressive strains. So it's not yet proven. The hypothesis, or what we think, we assume, is that the vaccine will be effective, but it may not be quite as effective. It's still better than nothing. And actually, on that still better than nothing, there are other vaccines around. So we've got AstraZeneca, we've got J&J, we've got Novavax. Those are 3 that spring to my mind. They're submitting their data or have submitted their data. Their effectiveness data is lower. I think it's around 66 for AstraZeneca and J&J. But the safety data is pretty much the same. Now, again, you outweigh, come back to what I say, outweigh the risks versus the benefits. You get a jab, no side effects, and now you have a significantly less chance of getting the vaccine. Would you take that risk? I would. Children, I talked about that earlier, they're not approved, and pregnant lactating women also not approved. So that was in terms of the effectiveness. Is it safe? I said at the beginning, I do know that it's safe. We track safety on an ongoing basis, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there are lots of bodies, different bodies and independent bodies that monitor patient safety throughout the course of a study and in case of vaccinations 2 years after the vaccine has been given to make sure that the patients still are safe and don't fall ill. Amongst those are FDA. So the FDA firstly has a database in place, safety surveillance in place, as does the CDC, but also ethics committees. So ethics committees act in the interest of the patients. Every doctor has an ethics committee. The trial has to be approved by an ethics committee, and they look at the same thing. Does the benefit of this treatment outweigh the risks? If the answer is no, they will not let this patient be treated. They will not approve this protocol. Trials are done in a controlled setting, always under medical supervision. There is a doctor and a nurse who always monitors the patients. It might not be in person as you get to phase 3. It might be remotely, but data is captured. There are independent monitoring boards, ongoing monitoring boards, and then diverse mechanisms for expanded safety surveillance, specifically now for the vaccines. What happens once you've received the vaccine, once you've finished? So there are 6 or 7 different databases, some very new that have been instituted to continue to monitor the patients. One example is a system called vSafe. which is a smartphone-based post-vaccine health checker. They send you a text and say, how are you feeling? What are your symptoms? And they collect the information there. There's nothing worrisome that has come back from these checks. And that's just one mechanism. Specifically, what side effects do we see? So what I've done here is compare the side effects that you see from the flu vaccine to the side effects that you see from the COVID-19 vaccine. You get the flu vaccine every year. You get pain, swelling, redness at the injection site. COVID vaccine, funny. You get pain, swelling, redness at the injection site. Flu vaccine, you may get chills or fever. COVID vaccine, you may get chills or fever. Tiredness, headaches, muscle pain, nausea. The side effects are the same, flu vaccine versus COVID vaccine. And the side effects, to be clear, are actually a good thing because the side effects are simply a symptom that your body is responding to the vaccine, that your body has received an antigen and is making antibodies to attack the body or the spike, whatever you want to call it. So it's a good thing that you have these side effects if you have them. There are rare instances of different reactions. Minimal. But I do want to point out severe allergic reactions, also called anaphylaxis. In the Pfizer vaccine trial, 6.2 people, don't ask me where the 0.2 comes from, per million injections have a severe allergic reaction. And mainly these are people who are known to have a reaction to these kind of vaccines in the first place. If you've had a vaccine, you probably know that you are asked to stay at the site of the vaccine for 15 minutes for observation, or for 30 minutes if you're known to have an allergic reaction to vaccines. And basically, the person administering the vaccine has an EpiPen. So basically, any allergic reaction, they could give you the EpiPen if you have major issues. Those are the commonly reported and the rare side effects. I think of, again, bringing a drug to market like a rheumatoid arthritis drug. You probably don't have this level of information, but there are side effects. There are side effects too. So for example, ibuprofen, it erodes the gastric lining if you take it too often, too frequently. So you do have gastric upsets. But yet people are happy to take the drug for rheumatoid arthritis because for them, the benefits outweigh the risk. So I come back to the same comment that I made earlier. Look at the benefits versus the risks. I'm scared about the questions you're going to ask me, so I've put some up here. But things that I thought you might be asking me would be, can you get COVID-19 from the vaccine, particularly with the new methodology that has been used? Because I think that's one of the concerns, the mRNA methodology. And the answer is no. It's a tiny protein of messenger RNA. It does not replicate in the body. It just helps the body recognize that it needs to attack this particular sequence of amino acids. No, you cannot get COVID-19 from the vaccine. If you feel a little off, it's because of a side effect from the vaccine, not because you have COVID-19. Should you get vaccinated even if I've had COVID? Short answer, yes. I do believe there's a recommendation for a duration. I think it's 6 weeks between waiting till you're over COVID to get the vaccine. I would check with your doctor, but yes, absolutely. Once you've had the vaccines, do you still need to adhere to the social distancing, masking, hand washing, etc.? I'm sorry, I went through the slide deck with my other half and was told to remove the hell yes, but I didn't, sorry. So absolutely, keep up your social distancing because there's still way too much corona out there. More vaccines, I mentioned them earlier, and that's not the end of it. There are a lot more being developed. There are not enough vaccines for the world at the moment. How long am I going to be immune? And when do I need to be revaccinated? A short answer is we don't know. So how are we finding that out? We're checking with the patients who have been vaccinated. We're drawing blood and we're checking their antibodies in a regular time frame to see, do they still have the antibodies and how high is the titer? So a lot more work ongoing in the space. I just need to be clear on that. So why should you get vaccinated? Firstly, it will protect you from the virus. Even if you do get ill, you will not get seriously ill. It will protect the people around you, particularly those at increased risk. And I believe a lot of you work with a higher risk population. And this is purely selfish. It'll stop the pandemic. Let's get life back to normal. A lot of people have asked me, would you get vaccinated? The short answer is absolutely. Unfortunately, I'm not on any list, so I'm staying at home. However, my mother-in-law is 94, and she received the Moderna vaccine shot last week. Perfectly happy with it, no side effects. My mother is 83 and lives in Germany. She received the Pfizer vaccine just after Christmas. So she's already had her 2 doses. Her life goes on as normal. My daughter is 13. She cannot get the vaccine because it's not yet approved for 13-year-olds, but I signed her up for the clinical trial, knowing that frankly, if she's in the clinical trial, she would get the vaccine and she would be much closer monitored by the investigator. Unfortunately, they finished enrollment by the time she was up. So, but I would give this to my daughter. So that kind of wraps up my presentation. How am I doing for time? Oops, sorry, I talked long. I like talking. But my key messages here, what I try to get across to you is, there's been a lot of research on these vaccines. The benefits for getting the vaccine far outweigh the risks. We have so much data to show that the vaccines are safe and to show that they are effective. So vaccine hesitancy, I hope to have allayed your fears that the vaccines are safe and are effective. Barbara.
Helen, I have
Yes.
a question. Early on, when there was discussion about how you the time it takes to build your immunity. And I just want to be sure my facts are correct. I don't know if it was specific, it was Moderna and Pfizer early on, and I don't know if it relates to one or the other or both. But I had heard that when you get your first shot, it may take up to 2 weeks.
Yes.
Before you would probably have like a 50% immunity. And then after you get your booster shot, whether it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks after the first, it would take another 2 weeks after that. So the 94% effectiveness is something that from the time you got your first shot would then be available to you potentially 6 weeks after your first shot. Is that correct?
That is correct. In the Pfizer study, it was actually measured 1 week after the second vaccine. So Pfizer is 3 weeks plus 1 week, it's 4 weeks, so within a month would be the effectiveness. I can't speak to Moderna, but the message is, yes, you wouldn't really be considered fully immune or to the 95th percentile immune until you have had the second shot and wait for that second shot to take effect. So up until then, again, all safety precautions, quarantine, etc., adhere to them.
Okay, there was a question that came up, and it might relate to this. There was a staff person who reported that they were vaccinated with both doses of Pfizer and still tested positive for COVID-19. Could you speak to that?
It is possible. Again, if we look at the 95% that is successful, there's still 5% that isn't successful. So there is a chance that that person was not, or immunity was not conferred to that particular patient, would be an outlier. But I would also have to ask, at what point was that patient, the staff member tested? So if it happened between or just before dose 1, between dose 1 and dose 2, there is a chance that she actually didn't have the full ability to be immune and contracted the virus in that time frame. It is possible.
One of the things, this is just an observation, Helen, and I shared this when I had my staff meeting yesterday. I was struck by this statistic, and this is from a layperson who obviously I've been following this closely, but I realized we hit a point either last week or early this week where more people had been vaccinated than had been determined to have COVID. And I was researching just by Googling how many people, obviously we're confronted every day with how many people have passed as a result of COVID. What we're looking at as a country, and the number is something like 450,000 around there. So out of, 26 million people who we're aware of who've contracted COVID, 450,000 have passed. And I know people are anxious about the safety, but there are over, now I think this morning I heard 32 million have been vaccinated. So, there are now more people vaccinated than are people who've actually contracted the disease. And while there are still some cases, and I'd like to hear if you're aware, I didn't see any confirmed cases of, certainly there were confirmed cases of allergic reactions, but it was a small number. But I've not heard any people who
dying
death
from the
has been
vaccine.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's correct.
I mean,
We've not had any, and that would be, when we look at the side effects, we class them into levels of severity. Death would obviously be the most severe, but we haven't had any, not that we're aware of. And maybe this is too much detail, but when you look at the side effects, and I'm thinking this because I'm sure people have anecdotally read of other side effects. When you look at side effects of any medication or the vaccine, there's always the question, is it related to the vaccine or is it related to the drug? So when people, and so I'm kind of digressing from death, but we would capture, if somebody gets a vaccine shot, goes outside and is run over by the bus, we would capture that as an adverse event or serious adverse event, very serious adverse event, to the vaccine, whether it's related or not. So coming back to your comment, Barbara, no deaths, not that I'm being aware of, but B, when you look and read about anecdotal adverse events, please bear in mind, if you're treating the amount of people that we're treating, something is bound to happen. Is that bound to happen due to the vaccine, due to the drug, or is it something that maybe was there all the time and has just surfaced? And I'm specifically thinking about, there was one about Bell's palsy. I can't remember whether it's Moderna or Pfizer. So is it really related to the drug, the vaccine? Sorry.
Yes, I had also read that, there seemed to be a higher incidence in Norway of people over the age of 75 passing away after they got the COVID vaccine, but people over 75 had, they were hard pressed to say that it wasn't from multiple medical issues that those people might have had. But
yeah,
like you said, it's being investigated. It's still being evaluated.
Yeah, and all we do then is look at the data and we evaluate the trends. You cannot make inferences from isolated incidences. There has to be a trend. There was one incidence where, and I think this made the headline news back in August. It was the AstraZeneca drug. They stopped development of the drug because of some spinal disease that was discovered with the patient. Big brouhaha about it. Everybody was worried about it. But if you follow the news stories to the end, it had nothing to do with the drug, with the vaccine, absolutely nothing. And the trial continued. So all I'm trying to say is just be aware. I think you take what you read with a grain of salt as well. Question, is it really correct?
Right. One of the questions that came up in that's in the chat related to someone who, and I think this is a general question. Can someone who has had the vaccine spread the vaccine to other people? Spread the disease to other people? So the staff member who tested positive post vaccine, are they contagious? In other words,
yes, I believe so. Yes. Yeah. I am going to confirm that, Barbara. That's more of a medical question, but
okay.
I believe it's the case.
Oh, by the way, for the people on the call, we've gotten some questions that are similar in different education programs that we've put forward. I don't know how Linda could answer this question. We do have a frequently asked question page on our website, which we will add to. We don't always have the answers as we get them from the authorities. We've been relying a lot on, I caution you, even though I am a great fan of Google, I Google regularly. I do, with respect to the vaccine and for COVID-19, I am looking to people like the CDC and the FDA and medical experts rather than everything you see on the internet. Okay, let me see. We do have a testimonial on our chat. Someone who got their second Moderna yesterday is feeling terrific and wondered if it can make you even feel better than you thought you were when you get the second vaccine. I know I'm going to feel better, regardless of any symptom I might have once I get. I'm scheduled for my second shot on Monday, so I'm looking forward.
Okay, lucky. Are you getting Moderna or Pfizer?
Moderna.
All that work that I've done.
That's what was available,
Yeah,
had I known. Something else that I don't know if Nadine is on the call, but we did have someone provide some information to our self-advocates who had been in one of the trials. So he actually received the vaccine back in March, and he was talking about, because I think people are also, I don't see a question here, but some people were concerned, maybe it was April, but he's had it, I think he said at least 6 months, because it hasn't been around that long. And I think you responded to this, but people are saying, are there long-term effects that I don't know about now? And am I better off waiting?
Yes. And that's really what I was trying to get at. And that is a valid, sorry, not that any question is not valid, but that is an overarching question on the safety that I hear repeated again and again and again. It is true that we don't have long-term data. I think I've stopped sharing my screen, but if I go back to what I mentioned earlier about expanded safety surveillance. So there are people who have now had the vaccine from at least Pfizer, started in April. So they're now 9 months in. There are still no concerns about the safety. You mentioned this gentleman was started in March. So he
apparently it was
12,
May. I'm sorry, I was wrong.
Okay.
It's May.
Okay. But regardless, it's really 8 months in. There's still no concern at this point. There is no, at some point your body digests. You build the level of antigens go down. We know that. Or if you have a drug, the half-life of the drug is no longer available and you excrete, you eliminate the drug. So at some point, you know that you're not going to have any more effects. Now, I don't want to say with 100% certainty, because we're not there yet, that there are no long-term effects. But if you look at the flu vaccine, which I'm kind of comparing us to at the moment, there are no long-term effects of the patients that have currently been vaccinated with a COVID vaccine. No long-term effects to date. So it comes back to my saying, outweigh the risk against the benefit. You won't get COVID, or you're unlikely to get COVID is the benefit. The risk is, you want to continue to expose yourself for whatever, another year. How long do you want to wait? I think that's a personal decision, but I don't fear for any long-term emergent safety issues on the vaccines.
Helen, one of the
Can
things we heard.
Sorry,
Oh, sure,
Barbara.
go ahead.
Barbara, let me just come back, because I was just actually checking with our medical officer about the question that I couldn't answer. So, yes, you would still be a carrier if you had the vaccine. You can still affect people if you have had the vaccine, because it means that you probably had the virus in the immune system prior to getting the vaccine. So you could still spread it.
Helen, I know you addressed this in your presentation, but we have a question about the new strains and what implications that might have as to effectiveness and safety.
Yeah. I can really only tell you what I know. So the new strains, as you probably know, seems to be more aggressive. It is not unusual that viral activity evolves over time. And that's why, for example, we have a continuous, the flu shot that you get is different every year, because it kind of adapts to different strains. So that happens, the same is happening with the COVID strain. We're getting an increasingly aggressive virus, but the vaccines have not been tested against them. So specifically for Pfizer, I can tell you that we're now looking at a subset of around 1,200 patients with the aggressive strain testing the vaccine. I have seen the comments from Dr. Fauci. I do the same as what you do at Barbara. I Google. The general feeling is that safety would not change. Efficacy might be reduced. So you wouldn't look at 95%. It might be lower. But that is yet to be determined. I do know, I'm not sure that I can really say this, but on a different study that I'm working on, a different vaccine, not yet at market, their efficacy data on the South African strain, because they were doing the study just in South Africa. So they got a lot of patients with the aggressive South African strain. Their efficacy data went down to 50%. But even then, I throw out there, look at your risks and look at your benefits. The risks, there are hardly any risks. Negligible risks, the benefits. 50% chance of not getting COVID is better than 0% chance. So even if the efficacy of the current available vaccines is somewhat reduced, and again, we don't know that, still look at the benefits. I'm sorry, I'm kind of repeating myself.
No, that's good. We have another question, and I know that when you get the vaccine, you answer a questionnaire, which really goes to whether or not you're symptomatic at the time. But let's presume someone is asymptomatic, but actually has COVID, and they get the vaccine. Are they at any greater risk? Do we know what's going on there?
No, unlikely that they're at greater risk. Again, can I defer on that one? I'll get back to you.
Sure. I didn't
Sorry.
say they were going to be easy questions, Helen.
I did say I'm not a doctor. I'm not a doctor. Putting me in the hot seat here.
That's actually a new one. I haven't heard that before, and that's a good question if you don't know. So it comes up to the issue of, I guess, do you want to be tested before you get the vaccine, or should you be tested? But I'll if you want to run that past your medical folks. Now, someone on the call has indicated that they've been getting tested weekly. And I know in New Jersey, the state has given us the ability, it's almost like a home test that is available to us, but we've had a number of people vaccinated. If you've been vaccinated, should you continue to test?
The chances of you having or testing positive following, say, let's say 2 weeks following the last vaccination are minimal, but we don't know how long immunity lasts. So I'll give you a short answer. If you want to be 100% certain, continue testing. If you feel a little more comfortable, I would certainly give it 2 months without testing.
Okay, let me go back in our chat box.
Can I just come back to, if you have the virus, you don't know it, you get the vaccine, is there any higher risk or anything you need to be aware of? The answer from my doctor there, it's a lady called Kristen. She says, no, no higher risk, nothing else that we know of. In fact, the belief is that if you have had the virus and recovered, you may only need 1 dose of vaccine.
I have heard, by the way, you had mentioned that wait period, and I don't know if it's changing. I had originally heard we have some people in some of our group homes who've tested positive, and their doctors are recommending 90 days.
Yes,
so especially
right.
with the new strains, we've asked that the doctors reevaluate that guidance if anything has changed.
Yeah.
There is so many things running around on the internet. And, for example, I've heard, we did have a family member who had heard the notion that COVID vaccine could give you Bell's palsy. So these things kind of surface all over the place. But I think people may be a little bit confused by, they hear about the vaccine, the mechanism of the vaccine is, RNA. So there is some rumor out there that somehow your DNA could be affected if you take the COVID vaccine. And that's one of the rumors that are circulating. So looks like you have a short answer for that one.
No, yeah, and that's what's basically what I was trying to say earlier. One of the questions is, can you get COVID from the vaccine? No. So what the messenger RNA does is basically, it is not DNA. DNA replicates with the help of mRNA, but mRNA cannot replicate back to DNA. It's genetically impossible. So mRNA simply delivers a genetic code to the cells that they respond to and they get activated, but you don't get, there's no change in your DNA. It's not possible to get COVID from injecting a messenger RNA strand. The J&J and the AstraZeneca vaccines, they work slightly different. So Moderna and Pfizer are both the mRNA vaccine. J&J and AstraZeneca, traditional vaccines, same as what you've done for example, Ebola, sorry, you call it in the US. It's a harmless virus. So it's a deactivated virus strand that you inject and you build up the antibodies to the spike protein in that. But again, it's not active and you cannot get COVID from that either.
Helen, one person on the call was wondering, since not everybody, if there's a 5% or more chance of people not developing an immune response, is it recommended that at some point after you receive the vaccines that you get antibody testing to ensure that you've developed an immunity?
That's a good question. Sorry, Barbara, I'll take it back.
Okay. I'm looking at our chat.
I think you got most of them, Barbara. I think almost all.
Yeah, I think so as well. Certainly, if you'd like to unmute yourself and you have a question for Helen. Feel free.
Barbara, it's Linda. I just wanted to just reiterate what I wrote in the chat, that if you're listening and you feel like you're ready to get the vaccine, to just reach out to the appropriate person based on the department and state. And we'll make sure to add you to our list, as we are getting more and more relationships and partnerships, and we want to be able to know, who's ready to go. So please, please definitely do that. And you can even, communicate with us right now.
Right. So, I mean, we're pleased to say, I'm sure you've heard on the news that supply was not keeping up with demand, and some people were even canceled out of their scheduled appointments. That's been changing somewhat, and we have, we're pleased that it's a limited number of appointments, but we are able, if you contact Linda, for community people, are they contacting you or their supervisor? And I know that you had indicated if you work in New York residential, you should contact your residence manager, because we are hoping in the next couple of weeks to be able to become a vaccination hub. May sound too lofty, but one of our partners who is administering the vaccine will be coming, for example, to our Bronx office, maybe one of our sites in Brooklyn, and we'd be able to schedule people not at a public location, but at one of our office locations. So that's new. And we don't yet have that in place. We are working with ChemRx, which is our pharmacy, and I'm not sure what other pharmacy they're partnering with, but we expect that should open up in a couple of weeks. So these appointments, as if you've tried to get a vaccine on your own in New York and New Jersey, I'm sure you've been frustrated. It's getting better. In New Jersey, the state has done a set aside for the people we support and the staff who support them. It's not public. Thank you, Trinette. ChemRx is partnering with Walgreens. So as they get a supply, we will have use one of our locations to dispense. So in New Jersey, it's not a public distribution, it's a closed distribution center in New Jersey. In New York, hopefully we'll have something similar, but right now we're just linking with anybody who has vaccine availability, and we're trying to get as many people as want the vaccine to an appointment, but it has been slow. It's getting a little better. I know that both Trinette and Linda have been working on that this last week. I see another chat. Oh, was that from, oh, that was from Trinette.
Say something positive.
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Okay, I received the second Moderna vaccine last night, and I'm the person that's asking this antibody question, because what I heard there were 3 doctors did an experiment. So the 2 weeks after, after the second shot, when you come to the highest level of it being effective, they did that and they had the antibodies. So that's why people were asking questions, and they said it works. What I will tell you is I will never get a flu shot, because I know that's injecting the flu strand, and I have never gotten one. This is, there's no problem. So clearly everyone's body reacts differently. I'm not the salesperson for the vaccines, but all I can say is that, so now the second day after number 2, I have a sore arm. Okay, it feels like when you get the TB shot, that's about it. Slight headache last night, chills, I don't know, maybe a little bit. I was a little cold. That's about it. And so I'm thrilled. So that's just, as you would say, Barbara, a testimonial. But the longer people wait, I think, and get nervous, like anything in life, whatever that is, and you hold on to a fear, it gets larger and larger and larger, and there's more stories. So ultimately, everyone makes their own decision. And but I'm very fortunate and very happy to have this gift.
I just want to respond to the question because my handy medic here is responding to me as well. So in terms of getting antibody testing to confirm immunity after the vaccine, her response is it's not recommended at this time. And I said, why not? And she said, sorry, I guess because most vaccines, including the flu vaccine, are only 40 to 50% effective. Therefore, a vaccine that is 90 to 95% effective is considered amazing. And the costs to get checked for immunity are prohibitive for most.
I just want to reiterate, and I can't thank you enough for your time, Helen. I mean, this has been wonderful. And I would ask anybody on the call, you know, the people on the call, not only as you're thinking about this for yourself, but if your staff come to you and have questions, and as Christina said, they will. I think what I would like to say is please get your information from sources that are vetted, because as we know, there's you know, anecdotal stories that, you know, I always, even though I'm a great fan of Mr. Google and everything he has to tell me, I think of Google as the wizard behind the curtain that tells me everything I ever want to know. I don't click on every story. I look at what the source is to the story. You know, if that piece of information that popped up at the top of my Google search is from some, I don't know, either funny name or something I've never heard of, I would be concerned. So as people come to you, ask you questions, say, gee, I heard that, just ask people to go back, look at the source, look at what the scientific sources are saying. And if we can help with providing you with information and good sources, you know, that's our responsibility. The other thing I would want to say is I know there's still some people who are, and you don't have to respond to me, but I really would like to know, there are still some people where the vaccine hesitancy is driven by a lack of trust in the messenger. So I guess I would want to ask you, who would a messenger, and we were having this discussion at my staff meeting, because I know it's out there, is to say, who would be a messenger you would trust? Who would be, you know, who are the people that you would feel more, you know, if you're on the call today and you're still not sure because you haven't heard it from someone who you trust to give you straight information, who is that? You know, we'll see if we can find a resource for you that can talk with you about this. Helen, I am sorry. I see you put up your screen again.
Yeah, just in case anybody has questions, I clearly wasn't able to answer all the questions, but if you want to ping me, that's my email address there at the bottom, helen.yeardley@icomplc.com. I can certainly get back to you. I will reach out to my friendly CMO and get you an answer if I haven't answered the questions appropriately.
Again, thank you, Helen, so much you've been very, very generous with your time. I think this was fantastic. I feel like I spend every waking minute trying to learn about this, and I learned I learned a significant amount today. So I really, really appreciate it. The messages are coming through chat, thanking you as well. But I think I speak for everyone on the call. We really appreciate your knowledge and your generosity, and we may be calling upon you again. You never know.
I just want to return the thanks here, Barbara. I didn't say it up front, but if I go right up to the beginning. So my daughter is autistic. One of the reasons I'm a board member here is because I was impressed with CFS and the way you run homes. I actually visited one of the homes, and I just hope that when I'm no longer able to care for her, that she finds that people like you guys are in CFS, and who will take as much care of her as I see you taking care of your current people. So I appreciate everything you're doing as an organization. So thanks to the people on the line. And on that, I will leave you and move on to my next meeting, if that's okay, Barbara.
Okay. Thank you very much, Helen. And
Thanks.
thank you to everyone on the call.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.